As we continue on now, the Ein Yaakov, a little bit paraphrasing the exact words of the Gemara, he says as follows: Kishabo b'Gemara lefarish shmanim upsilos demasnisim. As the Gemara goes on to explain the oils and wicks of our Mishnah, namely the ones that were prohibited in the Mishnah from usage on Shabbos, his kirum le'inyan Chanukah. The Gemara then mentioned them in the context of Chanukah. V'amar Rav, and Rav said, madlikin behen, that those wicks and oils that are prohibited for use on Shabbos, as we've explained beforehand, that's because we're concerned that they're not going to burn well, and you might have to start fiddling around with them on Shabbos, which would be a malacha, a prohibited activity on Shabbos. But on Chanukah, you may use them, despite the fact that they might go out. Not that they definitely would go out, but they might go out. Amar Rav madlikin behen, and Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, my time of the Rav, Rabbi Yirmiyah explained why is Rav of the opinion that you may use them on Chanukah. Chasavra is of the opinion kavsa ein zokok la, that if the candles go out on Chanukah, then you're not required to relight them. And since you didn't light the Chanukah candles for the purpose of having light, and there's no issue if they go out that, oh my gosh, I better make sure they light because they've got to light for half an hour, because no, if they don't last half an hour, you don't have an obligation to relight them. Therefore, you can use wicks and oils that are prohibited for usage on Shabbos, may be used on Chanukah. Amru Rabbanan Kameda Abaya Mishmei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, and various rabbis mentioned this halacha in the presence of Abaya in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, velo kibluha, and Abaye refused to accept that this was the halacha. Ki asa Ravin, subsequently when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amru Rabbanan Kameda Abaye, the Chachamim again told this halacha over before Abaye, but this time instead of saying in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, they said it Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. They said that Rabbi Yochanan had also paskined the same way, and they'd heard this from Ravin, who had been a student of Rabbi Yochanan's in Eretz Yisrael, and had now come to Bavel. The Kibla. And this time Abaye accepted the halacha. And Amar Abaye said, I zakoi, had I merited, gamirto lishmaito meikara, I would have learned this halacha originally when it was told to me in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah. So the Gemara says, well, who cares if he would have known the halacha earlier? V'gamra. But now he did learn it. So the Gemara explains, nafkamina legirsa diyankusa. The difference is that had he accepted the halacha earlier, it would have been something that he had learnt in his youth. And the fact that he rejected it when he heard it originally and was only accepting it now, he's lacking in the girsa de yankusa. It doesn't qualify as something he studied in his youth. Rashi explains that the younger you are when you study something, the more apt you are to remember it. And therefore, Abaye felt the fact that he had not accepted this halacha until later in life meant he was less likely to remember the halacha. A couple of insights over here I'd like to share with you. The Sfas Emes points out that the word nefesh, which refers to the soul, is the Rashi Tevos. The letters spell out Ner Psila Shemen. Candle, which, as we discussed last class, candle is the actual container in which the oil goes, wick and oil. And it's telling you that there are various souls which don't find any inspiration and uplifting when they experience a Shabbos. Those souls, despite the fact that Shabbos won't have an impact on them, but Chanukah and the experience of Chanukah can have an impact on them. Why is it? Now, it's interesting that we do find here in America, for example, that even though there are many people who are not at all Shabbos observant, but Chanukah still has meaning to them. The Avnei Nezer gives an interesting explanation as to the reason, perhaps, why there's a distinction between the inspiration of Shabbos and inspiration of Chanukah. He says that on Shabbos is a time when spiritually the entire world is lifted up to a much higher level. Umi yala bahar Hashem. Not everybody is capable of going up to those lofty levels that Shabbos can achieve. And therefore, there are certain souls that just can't hack it when it comes to Shabbos. But Chanukah, as we're going to learn later on, the ideal placement of Chanukah candles is below 10 tfachim, is within 30 or 40 inches of the ground. It's not something that requires a tremendous amount of spiritual growth. Even those who are spiritually close to the ground can still connect to Chanukah. He says because Shabbos is a time when we have to, or meant to, experience love and connection to God. And love and connection really only work when there's nothing else getting involved and interfering. It's very difficult to truly experience love for somebody if you've got love for something else interfering. And therefore, even just a little bit can ruin the experience. But he says when it comes to the miracle of Chanukah, it's a miracle that's predicated upon self-sacrifice for holiness and self-sacrifice for what it means to be a Jew. And that's something that anybody can experience, no matter what spiritual level or what level of observance a person is on. Wherever they're holding, they have the ability to experience self-sacrifice for what their Judaism means to them. And therefore, everybody can experience Chanukah in a way that not everybody can have a spiritual experience of Shabbos. We mentioned towards the end of this piece that Abaye regretted not having absorbed this halacha when he was younger and only making it part of his repertoire when he was older, because had he learned it when he was younger, it would have been part of his girsa diyan kusa, his study of his youth. Instead, now it's only part of his study at a more mature time in his life. Rav Kook explains as follows. He says that, and again, as I often say when I share something from Rav Kook and from others, sometimes I'm not 100% sure what they mean. And perhaps what I'm saying over is just my interpretation of what they meant, or maybe it's my inspiration from what they said. So if what I'm saying, if you ever take a look at the piece from Rav Kook and you feel this isn't what he said, that's fine. And this is what I'm saying, inspired by Rav Kook's words. When we learn something when we're young, we have the ability to take certain messages out of what we learned. And then as we grow older and we mature and we review again the same material that we learned when we were younger, we have the ability to now take new lessons and new inspirations in our mature state that are different than the lessons and inspiration that we took out of them when we were younger. But if a person only learns something when he's older and not when he's younger, so he's only getting the more mature inspiration, and he's losing out on the lessons and inspiration of youth that he could have had. That was Abaye's regret out of only learning this halacha when he was older and not having learned it when he was younger. And I'm going to add to this that in conversations that I've had with people who grew up Torah observant and learned quite a bit of Torah and then subsequently rejected it, I often find that the problem is the opposite, that they learned certain things when they were younger, and as they got older, they never revisited those same topics to learn to appreciate them in a more mature manner. And they continued holding on to those ideas as a girsa de yankusa, but never revisited them to understand them in a mature way. And then all of a sudden, as a mature adult, these ideas didn't sit well with them. And for whatever reason, they didn't have the ability at that point to revisit them with a more mature outlook. But I think the lesson from this Gemara is we've got to learn things twice over. When I say twice over, it's really more than twice over. But we need to learn things when we're young, even children, little kids, in order to get a certain level of appreciation and understanding that only a child can have. But it's equally important to relearn these things as we get older from the more mature perspective and adult perspective, so that we have the gam kiyazkin, that even when we get older, we don't stray, that we have a perspective of an adult on things as well. Thank you very much for listening. And we want to thank the Miller family for sponsoring this and future classes on the Ein Yaakov. Le'ilu Nishmas Chana Dvora Bas Avraham.